I've played a Pokemon Scarlet and Violet Hardcore Nuzlocke with every type in the game except for Poison. So today, I'm gonna try to make it to the final boss of Pokemon Scarlet while only allowed to catch one of each Poison type in the game. And because this is a Hardcore Nuzlocke challenge, any of those Poison types that faint will have to be boxed forever. The best early game strategy for Scarlet and Violet is to catch a Stone evolution early to blast through the first few badges. Unfortunately, that's not an option we have with Poison types, so instead, I track down the strongest Pokemon I can find within the first level cap of 15. With a base special attack stat of 100, Ghastly is an incredibly strong unevolved Pokemon. The real drawback is its terrible defenses, but Ghastly kinda gets around that with its ghost typing. This means we're completely immune to Teddiursa's Fury Swipes, and we don't take too much damage from Fury Cutter since Ghastly quad resists Bug. The next boss is Cloth, and I've never once seen it use Rock Tomb during the first phase of the fight, meaning Ghastly is completely immune to the rest of its moveset. I still want to be as prepared as possible for phase 2, so I use the jumping backwards exploit to get up on this ledge to collect the TM for Giga Drain. I also start the Teal Mask DLC to get access to Kitakami. There aren't a ton of poison types we can get below level 16 here, but at least we can grab an Ekans with a 50% chance to get Intimidate. This way, after we finish the first phase where Ghastly's completely invulnerable, we can start phase 2 with Ekans to lower Cloth's attack before we swap out into Ghastly just to be a little bit extra careful. With a held Miracle Seed, Ghastly's Giga Drain deals enough to activate Cloth's Anger Shell, which is why we really wanted to use that Intimidate, since I'm pretty sure a +1 Rock Tomb would instantly take out Ghastly. Thankfully, Cloth focuses all its energy on Arven's Shelter, so Ghastly never even takes any damage. The Grass Gym leader Brassius is going to be easy no matter what poison type we use, but I make sure to pick up the TM for Sludge Bomb to make his downfall as swift and painless as possible. This completely obliterates his first two, frankly embarrassing team members. And by giving Ghastly a held Poison Barb, Sludge Bomb does enough damage to take Sudowoodo down to its sturdy. Sludge Bomb even gets Sudowoodo poisoned, so after it hits me with a Trailblaze, which it's guaranteed to do as long as it's slower, Sudowoodo simply falls to poison for an exceptionally easy second gym badge. With the essentially free matchups out of the way, we've got to prepare for our second Titan fight. Beating Brassius increases our level cap to 20, making it the perfect opportunity to pick up Paldean Wooper, since 20 is the exact level it evolves into Clodsire. Finally, before taking on the bird, all I've got to do is make this jump. All I've got to do is make this jump. God damn. All I've got to do is easily make this jump effortlessly on the first try to pick up the TM for Rock Slide. We're now ready to face the bird, and just like versus Cloth, I make sure to lead with Ekans to lower its attack with Intimidate. I then immediately swap out into Clodsire the very first turn. Staying healthy during this Titan fight is extremely important since you don't get healed between the two phases. Because of this, I took the most cautious approach I possibly could by grabbing both the leftovers and the TM for Protect. This way, I can alternate attacking and protecting every other turn to keep Clodsire as healthy as possible. For phase 2, I still get my Intimidate, but instead of immediately swapping out of Ekans, I make sure to go for Glare first to get it paralyzed. Now outspeeding the bird, Clodsire can go for a cheeky Paraflinch strategy using Rock Slide for an exceptionally easy phase 2. Before we're allowed to face the third gym, we've got to take on the first team Starbase. Thankfully, we can pick up Krogunk in the swampy area just below the level cap. On the way to this area, we can pick up the TM for Drain Punch, which basically trivializes the fight. Upon us is gym number 3, and this is one where you always have to be prepared. Between getting paralyzed by Spark, confused by Mismagius, or even having it set up on you with Charge Beam, there's a lot that can go wrong in this fight. To get myself fully prepared for all this, the only Pokemon that I'm desperately missing is Shroodle. After adding it to the team, I make sure to get everybody to the level cap, which evolves Ekans into Arbok. Going into the fight versus Iono, we've yet to lose a single Pokemon, and I'd love to keep it that way. This fight is probably the most common place for me to lose my first Pokemon throughout all my type runs. To cover my bases, Arbok's holding a Cherry Berry just in case we get paralyzed by Wattrel's Spark. It only takes a couple of Ice Fangs for Wattrel to fall, which brings out Iono's Belly Bolt. This bulky Avocado Frog can be a real menace if you trigger its Electromorphosis ability. However, today, it's not going to be posing any threat whatsoever. Water Absorbed Clodsire is completely immune to this thing's entire moveset, which does only consist of 2 moves, but hey, I'll gladly take the free matchup. Luxio comes out next, which is only able to attack Clodsire with Bite, making it another easy matchup. Finally, there's only Mismagius standing between us and getting through the early game of Scarlet and Violet without any casualties, and you best believe that I'm about to employ the most degenerate strategy ever to guarantee to get us through this fight without losing Pokemon. This is why it was so essential to capture Shroodle before the fight. What makes this Mismagius particularly annoying to deal with is Confuse Ray, since unless you have a Pokemon that can take it out in one hit after healing off Confusion with a Person Berry, you're pretty much screwed and leaving things up to chance. This is where we we exploit Mismagius's attacking moves of Charge Beam and Hex. As long as Cloudsire's in battle, Mismagius won't ever go for Charge Beam since it's a ground type. Similarly, Shroodle's normal type means it won't ever go for Hex, making it completely safe to swap between the two. As long as I keep count of the PP, I'm safe to start attacking as soon as Mismagius runs out of one of its moves and all of the Confuse Rays. It runs out of Hexes first, which is pretty convenient since Cloudsire is a much better attacker than my underleveled Shroodle. Eventually, Mismagius starts to struggle, so I made sure to give Cloudsire a Rocky Helmet just to make this process a little bit faster. I'd already wasted about 20 minutes of my life stalling this thing out of moves, so I needed it to go down as soon as possible. It may not have been the most beautiful strategy you've ever seen, but I still have all my Pokemon alive, and that's what matters. Our next objective is to collect any Pokemon that can set up Rain Dance. Doing so makes the fight versus Mela almost completely free no matter what team you're using. Think of it like subscribing. It's free, only takes a click of a button, and it's the perfect thing to be doing right now. Between my two choices of water poison type, I decided to catch Mareanie since I want to delay Quillfish for as long as possible. Quillfish would be the much better choice here since Marienie's pretty much useless until it evolves. To make up for Quillfish's absence, we'll have to power up the rest of our team starting with Ghastly, which we can evolve into Haunter. Being a trade evolution, we're even able to immediately fully evolve it, which adds some pretty significant power to the team. This new power is going to come in very handy since Mareanie is able to power down Mela's fire types with Rain Dance, but doesn't have a great way to dish out damage. It can easily make it through Torkoal's pitiful special defense, but it won't be able to solo the Starmobile, which is always the main threat of any Team Star fight. The goal here is to further power down the Starmobile as much as possible, starting with Arbok's Intimidate, and it kind of takes care of powering down itself on the special side by just using Overheat in the Rain, making its special attack a non-threat after just using one Overheat to get it to -2 special attack. This really just leaves Mela with one option, and it's to try and power down my defense with Screech, which requires me to swap around a bit to shake off the defense drops. The drawback of switching around so much is that I eventually lose my range, so I've got to bring back Mareanie to once again set it up. By this point, the Starmobile is so weakened that I just bring back in Arbok to finish off what little remains of its health. Definitely not as simple as just bringing a Pokemon with Flash Fire, but still pretty free. Speaking of free, we've next got to deal with Orthworm, a Titan Pokemon that I don't think I've had a problem with throughout any of my 18 type Nuzlockes of Scarlet and Violet. I make sure to give Gengar a Wide Lens to boost the accuracy of Will-O-Wisp, which not only halves the attack of Orthworm, but doubles the power of Hex. This makes for a quick and easy victory of possibly the most forgettable fight of the entire game. Because the next gym leader is Kofu, I head back to Kitakami to pick up a Bellsprout. Now personally, I've been a bit afraid of Victory Bell since the first anime, and let's just say the latest news hasn't exactly eased my concern. This time, however, it's thankfully not me who's about to be the victim of Victory Bell's wrath. I lead versus Veluza, which thankfully doesn't have a super effective Psychic type move and instead only has Pluck as its best option. Even as a critical hit, Pluck wouldn't do enough damage to take me out from full health, so I'm always able to set up the Sun. I use a held Wide Lens to get around Power Whip's slightly shaky accuracy to take out Veluza in one hit. Wugtrio is the main reason I wanted to set up the Sun, since Chlorophyll allows me to outspeed and I'll still be faster than Crabominable after having my speed dropped by Gooey. As for Crabominable, I don't want to take my chances with Power Whip's 93% accuracy after Wide Lens, so I instead go for Leaf Storm, which is not only boosted to 100% accuracy by the Wide Lens, but also hits Crabominable on its weaker defensive side. You know what they say, if you can't beat them, join them. So before taking on Atticus, I pick up a little Starmobile of my own. Sure, we might not be able to evolve Varoom before the level cap, a memo I guess Atticus didn't get, but right now we don't need it to evolve, we need its very specific type. In fact, I could care less if it had base 1 for all of its stats. I also take a quick detour back to Kitakami to pick up everybody's favorite Gen 1 Fart Ball. Finally, I make one more pit stop in Cascarafa to pick up a cheeky air balloon. Atticus of Team Star is a fellow poison type enjoyer, and frankly, there's only space in Paldea for one of us. His Skuntank lead is pretty much a free matchup for any steel type, which is why it was so important to pick up Varoom. Steel is of course immune to poison, and the only non-poison move that this Skuntank has is Sucker Punch, which only has 5 PP and doesn't deal any damage to you as long as you don't click an attacking move. The key here is to just have Varoom spam Screech 5 turns in a row until Skuntank runs out of Sucker Punches, and then knock out Skuntank with an Iron Head once it literally can't do do anything to us. This brings out Atticus's first Revavroom, a matchup that our little Varoom that could, unfortunately, has no chance of winning. Instead, this is another job for Clodsire, who eats a super effective Bulldoze before burrowing underground and picking up the KO with a quad effective Dig. Before the Starmobile, we've got to take care of Atticus's Muck, and this is little Varoom's second chance to shine. That's right, we are quad weak to Mud Slap, but that's exactly why we picked up the Air Balloon. What if it breaks our Air Balloon and Mud Slaps Varoom into a ditch, I hear you say? Well, that would be a problem if it could, but with Sludge Wave as its only other move, this Muck has no way of hitting Air Balloon Varoom whatsoever. As for the Starmobile, it's really only a problem if it can hit you for neutral to super effective damage with its Torque move. In this case, every single one of our team members, of course, resists Noxious Torque. So I switch around for a bit to lower its attack with a few Intimidates, and made sure to teach Arbok Earthquake before the fight for a quick and easy Starmobile victory. There really aren't any good upgrades to make to the team before we take on Larry. It would be great to use Toxicroak, but it evolves one level past Larry's level cap, so instead I'm stuck using Gengar. Just like Atticus's Skuntank, Larry's Kamala has Sucker Punch. Because it's super effective against Gengar, Larry will predictably spam this move for as long as he can. All we've got to do to get around this is just press Substitute 5 times to waste all of its PP. Once Kamala runs out of Sucker Punches, it only has Slam and Yawn, the former of which can't hit us because we're a Ghost type, and the latter can't hit through Substitute. So just like Varoom in the previous fight, Gengar is completely immune to anything this Kamala can do, setting us up perfectly behind a Substitute as we take out Kamala with a Sludge Bomb. With a held wide lens, I was really hoping to connect with this Focus Miss, but that's not how the move works. Instead, I deal 0 damage to Dunsparce and lose my Substitute to a Drill Run. I can't say I'm happy about it, but we're going for Plan B, which is burning Dunsparce with Will-O-Wisp, which conveniently also has its accuracy boosted by my wide lens. Dunsparce just goes for Glare, so it's nice to know I at least wouldn't have lost my Gengar if Will-O-Wisp had missed too. Expecting another Drill Run, I swap into Weezing, who can dodge it with Levitate. I go for Sludge Bomb to deal some damage, and after it paralyzes me with Glare, I realize I can just switch between my Levitating Weezing and my Gengar immune to Hyper Drill to slowly but surely whittle Dunsparce down with Burn at the end of every turn. Finally, we've just got to take care of Staraptor. I make a pretty big mistake by staying in and going for Sludge Bomb, since if I would have gotten Staraptor poisoned, that would just boost the power of its Facade. Terra Boosted Stab Facade is already terrifying enough, so I pivot through Gengar before I send in Arbok to make sure it gets hit by an Aerial Ace as I lower Staraptor's attack with Intimidate. This way, I don't take quite as much damage from the incoming Facade and make sure to hit Staraptor with Earthquake so that I don't get it statused. From there, I switch back to Gengar to dodge the incoming Facade, eating an Aerial Ace the following turn, just hoping and praying that Gengar doesn't get paralyzed so I can finish off Staraptor with a Sludge Bomb. Definitely the most inconvenient badge we've collected so far. No thanks to you, Toxicroak, thanks for evolving one level too late. With the new level cap of 42, we're able to get all 3 of our boxed Pokemon fully evolved. Because we're about to go up against Rhyme, I make sure to go and pick up Stunky. This thing is the main reason why we're playing Pokemon Scarlet, since it's an exclusive that you can't get in Violet whatsoever. It's the only Poison Dark type you can get in the base game, easily making it the most valuable Pokemon we can catch throughout the entire run since our team is cripplingly weak to Psychic types. This also makes it a particularly useful pickup versus the Ghost type gym leader Rhyme. In this double battle, I pair it with Arbok to lower Banette and Mimikyu's attack upon switching in. Both of them only have physical attack, so I take way less damage from Mimikyu's Slash. Banette, on the other hand, doesn't even get to move before Skuntank takes it out with a Crunch. Finally, Arbok uses Crunch as well at the end of the turn, but this is just to break Mimikyu's disguise. Rhyme then sends in Houndstone, and because of her gym's gimmick, we get a boost to both of our attack stats on both of our Mons. Mimikyu moves first once again with another pathetic Slash before Skuntank picks up another KO with Crunch. Arbok then deals about half to Mimikyu with another Crunch of its own before Rhyme sends in her final Pokemon Toxtricity. This thing isn't particularly fast, but to make sure I move first, I go for a Sucker Punch to immediately knock it out, which only leaves Mimikyu to be knocked out by a second Slash from Arbok. Before we can tackle the next gym, we've got to briefly take on Great Tusk, one of my favorite Paradox Pokemon just after Great Neck, Great Ball, and Great Grandma. This thing's stats are out of control except for its special defense, a little detail I abused to knock out its first phase in one hit with a super effective Leaf Storm. During phase 2 of each Titan fight, they all get twice the amount of HP, so we can't quite take it out with one Leaf Storm, so I instead send in my greatest physical defender to get it burned with Will-O-Wisp and start chipping away at it with flamethrowers. This is sadly a super slow strategy, as I protect every other turn to get as much burn damage as possible and heal up as much as I can with leftovers. It takes a bit of time, but eventually the Titan falls, which means we've got to go up against our worst type matchup in the game. So far, we've managed to make it it through the run without losing a single Pokemon, and if we were playing Pokemon Violet, that would all be about to change. While we could have easily made it past Rhyme without losing a Pokemon, since her gym gimmick makes it so easy to cheese the fight, Tulip would have definitely been a different story. With Skuntank, her Farigiraf has no chance of using Psychic-type moves, so I easily knock it out with a couple of Night Slashes. The only real Pokemon standing in Skuntank's way is Gardevoir, so I send in my Assault-Vested Revavroom to tank both a Dazzling Gleam and a Psychic before taking out Gardevoir with a single super effective Iron Head. Espathra comes out next, but I get a safe switch in back to Skuntank as it tries to go for Psychic. I unfortunately don't do quite enough damage to take out Espathra with a Sucker Punch, so I've got to take a resisted Shadow Ball before knocking it out. Once I do, Tulip's last Pokemon is her Florges, which I'm confident I can't take out with a single Sucker Punch, so I swap Norman Osborn into the resisted Moonblast. This way I'm baiting Psychic and can U-turn back into Skuntank for free. With the extra damage from U-turn, we've got no problem finishing off Florges with Sucker Punch to collect our 7th gym badge. I've delayed the next encounter as long as I could, since I don't want to take my chances with a Sizzlipede being male 7 out of 8 times. With the final gym's level cap being at 48, we can instead just encounter a fully evolved Salazzle and not worry about Salandit's gender ratio. This is going to make it a ton easier to beat the final gym, since Salazzle can just cook Gresh's first 2 Pokemon with Life Orb Flamethrowers. His Titan does have Thick Fat, so I expect a Flamethrower wouldn't one-hit KO, and instead send in Toxicroak, who can swap in for free on a Liquidation because of its Dry Skin ability. I frustratingly almost get the KO with Low Kick, so I'm forced to take half of my health from Ice Spinner before finishing it off. Finally, we've got to deal with Gresh's Altaria, so I send in my trusty Assault-Vested Revavroom to tank the incoming Hurricanes. They barely do any damage at all to my tank engine, making for a swift victory after a couple of Iron Heads. Now that we've collected all 8 gym badges, we still need to finish off the other 2 storylines before we can take on the Elite Four. To do so, I first head to Alfornata Cave to pick up the only electric type we can get, Toxtricity. I also make sure to evolve Marini, whose tanking abilities we're gonna be needing very shortly. The Fairy-type team star leader Ortega is at a pretty substantial disadvantage versus a team full of poison types. His first 3 Pokemon fall like a house of cards in a wind tunnel. It was never gonna work out. Once the Starmobile comes out, I make sure to reduce its damage output with a few Intimidates, which is pretty much a natural consequence of switching around to shake off confusion anyway. Once he's defeated, we've got to take care of his colleague Airy, but before doing so, I make sure to head to Castleroyal Lake to take out Dondozo, because it's pretty much the easiest fight in the game. Airy, on the other hand, can be one of the most punishing fights in the game if you don't come prepared. If I wanted to keep my deathless streak going, I knew I'd have to plan the whole fight before going in. Just like Atticus and Larry, Airy's lead has Sucker Punch, so I can lead with Gengar and go for Substitute 5 turns in a row to not only stall Toxicroak out of Sucker Punches, but guarantee that we get to stay behind a Substitute after we take it out with a quad-effective Psychic. The Substitute gives us 1 turn to try and connect with a Focus Miss, and this time I actually somehow hit it. I'd made a whole backup plan sort of expecting to miss this Focus Blast, but this makes things a lot easier. Next, Airy brings out Annihilate, which isn't much of a problem since we outspeed and can knock it out with a super effective Shadow Ball. Her last Pokemon before the Starmobile is Passimian, but because we're still behind the Substitute, we can simply stay in and go for a Psychic, which doesn't quite take Passimian out, but we don't need to worry about it outspeeding after Rock Tomb the next turn since Substitute stops it from lowering our speed. After our Substitute gets broken, we knock out Passimian with a second Substitute, which brings out the Starmobile. This thing has high horsepower, threatening most of our team, except for specifically Weezing, who can dodge it with Levitate. The thing that makes this Starmobile so dangerous is the fact that it gains defense every time you hit it because of its stamina ability and can set up its attack and speed with Shift Gear. The only non-resisted move it can hit me with is Spin Out, which doesn't do too much damage even at +1, but at +6, it would be a one-hit KO. I've taught Weezing Psybeam to deal as much damage as possible, and while I could wait for Revavroom to set up with Shift Gear and try and tank all the hits, the safest option is to just teach Weezing Clear Smog, which gets rid of all of Revavroom's stat boosts at once. This way, I don't have to worry about any crazy crits, and I trick Revavroom into starting to set up again all the way from +0. This is by far the safest strategy I've ever used against Airy that works so well since Weezing is immune to high horsepower. And now that we've collected all 18 badges, we qualify to enter the Pokemon League. So far, we've managed to make it to the Elite Four without losing a single poison type. But this point is where Generation 9 really starts putting you to the test, since every fight from this point on has 5 or more Pokemon. A benefit of not having lost any Pokemon is we still have every resource available to us, so all we gotta do now is put them to proper use. The first member of the Elite Four is the Ground-type Master Rika, who leads with Whiscash. I make sure to lead with Victory Bell to pick up the first KO with a quad-effective Leaf Blade. This brings out Camerupt, so expecting the Fire Blast, I send in my Assault-vested Clodsire, but Camerupt just ends up missing. Getting both crit and burn there would have been absolutely fine, since I'm only sending in Clodsire to bait the Earth power so I can swap in my Air Balloon Toxapex. Camerupt has 2 options here. It either breaks our Air Balloon with a Fire Blast that would barely do any damage whatsoever, or it goes for Yawn. Because it went for Yawn, we can stay in versus Donphan since our Air Balloon is still intact, and thus deal a bit of damage with Liquidation to break Donphan's sturdy. After falling asleep, we can safely swap Weezing into a predictable Earthquake since our Air Balloon's broken. I then just start spamming Sludge Bombs since Donphan basically can't touch our most physically defensive Pokemon. It only takes a few Sludge Bombs to KO Donphan, which brings out Dugtrio. Because we didn't take too much damage from Donphan, we're perfectly safe staying in here since Dugtrio is way weaker. It only takes 3 Sludge Bombs, 1 per member of the trio, I guess, and knocking out the mole brings Rika down to her last Pokemon, Clodsire. This is another situation where we're able to create an instant checkmate. Toxicroak, just like all of our other poison types, is completely unaffected by Toxic. Dry Skin makes us immune to Liquidation, and by giving Toxicroak an Air Balloon, we're also immune to Earthquake, meaning the only productive thing Clodsire can actually do is click Protect over and over again to try and stay alive as many turns as possible. Sorry Rika, but I'm not taking any chances today. The second member of the Elite Four is the Steel-type Master Poppy, who's of course fully immune to Poison-type moves. Poppy's one of the main reasons I couldn't risk getting a male Salandit. Salazzle is a fairly potent special attacker, and Poppy sends in her Pokemon in a way where we can easily knock out her first 3 before we're forced to switch out of Salazzle, which is really only due to Magnezone's Sturdy. If this thing didn't have Sturdy, I'm pretty sure Salazzle could just sweep through Poppy's entire team by spamming Flamethrower. Instead, I send in my trusty Assault-vested Clodsire to hit Magnezone with a quad-effective Earthquake and bring it down to Sturdy. All I need is 1 more Earthquake to take out that final hit point for Rika to send out her last Pokemon, Tinkaton. I know the Gigaton Hammer's coming here, so I swap in Arbok to lower its attack before taking the enormous hit. Now that Tinkaton's intimidated, I feel pretty safe swapping into Weezing. Tinkaton can't use its signature move 2 turns in a row, so I only take a little bit of chip damage from Stone Edge before getting hammered again. Using Will-O-Wisp pretty much turns Tinkaton's hammer into Styrofoam, and after burning it, I pretty much don't have to worry about taking damage and can knock it out with a few Flamethrowers. That's 2 Elite Four members down, 2 to go. The third member of the Elite Four is the Everyman Larry, and while a Life Orb Flamethrower would be more than enough to take out his Tropius the first turn, I instead go for Toxic, which isn't really to deal any damage over time, but instead just to waste the turn so that Tropius goes for Sunny Day. The sun triggers Tropius's Chlorophyll, making it twice as fast, which unfortunately for Tropius just isn't quite faster than Salazzle. Really the only thing setting up the sun accomplished, which is why I wanted him to do it in the first place, is to power up my Fire-type moves by 50%. This allows Salazzle to once again, just like versus Poppy, take out Larry's first 3 Pokemon with 0 effort whatsoever. It's only once he brings in Altaria, which has massive special defense and resists fire, that I've gotta swap out into Toxapex. Its highest damaging move is Dragon Pulse, which barely does anything because of my held Assault Vest, and I can knock it out with a couple of quad-effective Ice Spinners. Last out is Flamigo, so I swap into Grafaiai to take the incoming Brave Bird. Normally, a Terraflying boosted Brave Bird would be an instant knockout here, but with a held Focus Sash, we're able to hang on with just 1 HP, dealing as much recoil damage as possible back to Flamigo. The next turn, I'm able to outspeed and U-turn out into Electro. I was really hoping this resisted hit would do a lot less, but if I stay in and it gets a crit, I lose my Deathless Streak. So instead of staying in and trying to go for a slow Volt Switch, I immediately swap out into Weezing, who also takes a ton more damage than I could have ever guessed. The last Pokemon I can possibly send in, and the only one I still have at full HP, is Toxicroak, which with a held Focus Sash is just barely able to survive with 1 HP, and while it is slower, and Flamigo doesn't quite take itself out with recoil damage, we can go for the priority Sucker Punch the next turn to finish the bird off and continue our Deathless Streak into the final member of the Elite Four. The last member of the Elite Four is the Dragon Master Hassel, which is by far our worst matchup. We don't really have a great check for his lead Noivern, so I lead with my Assault-vested Toxapex. It annoyingly has Super Fang to take out half of our HP since all of its other moves would do way less. We're at least guaranteed to survive it and can deal some massive damage with a quad-effective Ice Spinner. We even have enough HP left to never be dead to crit, giving us a free KO at the cost of most of our HP. After Noivern, turn, Hassel sends out Dragalge, so I swap Clodsire into the incoming Thunderbolt. Dragalge really can't touch Clodsire, so I knock it out with a couple of Earthquakes. I really don't see what Flapple's gonna do to Clodsire at about full HP, so I decide to stay in as Flapple misses a Dragon Rush and deal some decent damage with Poison Jab. Flapple then goes for Leech Seed, which it's never gonna see any recovery from since I knock it out right afterwards. Haxorus comes out fourth and doesn't even deal half with a Dragon Claw, as I do about the same amount with an Earthquake. I am unfortunately still Leech Seeded, so this is definitely a losing matchup unless I swap out. Haxorus does a lot more damage than I was expecting to Weezing, so I make sure to get it burned in order to have enough time to knock it out with Sludge Bombs. The big bad Excalibur is a bit of an issue. If this thing connects with a Glaive Rush, it's pretty much game over for whatever it hits. I send in Grafaiai, who of course only survives because of a Focus Sash. I next go for U-Turn, dealing double damage because of Glaive Rush, and swap into Gengar. Now I was really hoping for a Glaive Rush on the switch since that would double my damage next turn, but instead Baxcalibur goes for Icicle Crash. This means if I click Dazzling Gleam now, it won't do enough damage to take Baxcalibur out, and I'm guaranteed to lose Gengar. The problem is, anything I switch in from here is just dead to Glaive Rush. No, this can't be it. This can't be the end of the deathless streak. Hold on a minute. When Baxcalibur used Icicle Crash as I swapped in, it activated Gengar's Cursed Body. This means the only move it can use the next turn is Glaive Rush or Brick Break, which means it's always Glaive Rush since I'm a Ghost type. And with 48 out of 178 HP remaining, I still have just over a fourth of my health left. This gives me just enough HP to use Substitute one time to make sure I survive the incoming Glaive Rush. As I mentioned before, whenever Baxcalibur uses Glaive Rush, it takes double damage the next turn. And this is exactly the damage boost we need to take it out with a single Dazzling Gleam, which just barely gets us through the Elite Four without losing any Pokemon. Now normally, getting through the Elite Four means you're pretty safe, since Gita doesn't exactly have the craziest champion team. But unfortunately for our Poison team, all of her Pokemon have at least one move that's super effective against Poison. This makes it the trickiest fight to prepare for of the challenge so far, but that's not going to stop me from trying my best. With each Pokemon on Gita's team threatening us super effectively, we've got to take as few hits as possible. This is why I start the fight with Gengar to immediately knock out Espathra with a Shadow Ball. This brings out Avalugg, so I swap Salazzle right into a quad-effective Earthquake. But don't worry, this is of course the expected outcome, bringing me down to my Focus Sash so I can take out Avalugg the following turn with a super effective Flamethrower. Because we're at 1 HP, this could potentially be any move from King Gambit, which is actually a good thing. If this is Zen Headbutt, it takes me down to my Sash, but 75% of the time, if it uses any of its other moves, I just heal all the way back up to full with Drain Punch, reactivating my Focus Sash. This makes me feel a lot safer for the rest of the fight, and as soon as Go-Goat comes in, I swap out into Skuntank to preserve Toxicroak's Focus Sash. With Zen Headbutt unable to hit my Dark type, this Go-Goat basically can't touch Skuntank, and I'm free to take it out with a couple of Venishocks. Veluza comes out next, and because I'm still at full HP, I decide to stay in and go for Night Slash, which almost takes it out. A Liquidation even lowers my defense, but I'm able to outspeed the next turn with Sucker Punch to knock Veluza out, bringing Gita down to her final Pokemon Glimmora. I start by getting a free switch into Weezing versus an Earth Power. From there, I know my Assault-Vested Toxic pair of balls are able to survive a critical hit Rock Terra Blast, so I decide to stay in and get just a little bit of chip damage with Shadow Ball before swapping out into Toxicroak. Because I got my Focus Sash back online again, I've got nothing to worry about from this Terra Blast. It even gets a critical hit, so originally, my plan was to get more than this amount of HP back from Drain Punch while taking out King Gambit. King Gambit has a pretty high HP stat of 100, so I'm pretty sure I would have gotten back above half health, even if it took me down to my Focus Sash with Zen Headbutt. I'm glad we managed to get past Gita deathless, but this just means we've entered the end game. Before we're allowed to face the final boss, we've got to take on 3 of the most dangerous fights in the entire game. Oh, and of course Penny. I decided to take on Director Clavel first for a very specific reason. At this point in the game, we can't actually enter the academy without triggering this fight, and I gotta get in there. First, we've got to take care of his lead Oranguru, which doesn't quite fall to 1 Night Slash. It manages to use Yawn before going down, but we can easily get around that by just equipping Skuntank with a berry before going into the fight. Gyarados comes out next, so I immediately swap out to dodge the incoming Earthquake. Once I get it burned, Weezing has no trouble taking Gyarados out, which brings in Abomasnow. I send in my Assault Saltfested Revavroom to deal with its 100% accurate blizzards and take it out with a few Iron Heads. For Poltegeist, I switch to Grafaiai, who finally gets to pick up a KO with a super effective knockoff. Amoonguss comes out 5th, so I swap to Salazzle, who's holding a Chesto Berry just in case it goes for Spore when I swap in, which is of course exactly what ends up happening. Because of the berry, I don't have to worry about sleep anymore and can take out Amoonguss with a single flamethrower. Unfortunately, we still have to deal with Skeledirge, which annoyingly has Earth Power. I could swap in Weezing to dodge the hit, but then I just get hit by a Torch Song and pretty much immediately lose the fight. Instead, I swap in Toxapex, who takes a substantial amount of damage, but at least it's not over half. Protecting serves two purposes here. We get a bit of HP back from leftovers, and we also waste Earth Power PP. This importantly gets us out of crit range from the next Earth Power, and we can use Recover to get almost all the way back up to full HP. While alternating Baneful Bunker and Recover is a great way to stall Skeledirge out of Earth Power PP, it doesn't actually deal any damage. So while I'm close to full HP, I make sure to poison Skeledirge with Toxic so that we get a bit of damage over time. Listen, it wouldn't be a poison type Nuzlocke if we never actually Toxic stalled. My Toxic stalling even ends up outpacing my PP stalling and takes down Skeledirge before it even runs out of Earth Powers. Sorry Clavel, but it had to be this way. The reason I want to get into the Academy so badly is to activate the Indigo Disc DLC. I could have done this way earlier so that I'd had the fast travel point before needing to fight Clavel. There is a huge problem with the Indigo Disc though, and it's that we don't actually get to explore the terrarium until we defeat Lacey. There are two really big problems with this fight. Number one, she's at level 70, which is past the final level cap. The second problem is her Excadrill, which is the third Pokemon after her Plusle and Minun. We can pretty easily defeat these two by first protecting with Toxtricity as I Earthquake with Clodsire. Turn 2, I switch Toxtricity for Weezing, and Clodsire gets taken below half by Grass Knot before taking out both Plusle and Minun with a second Earthquake. With both of them gone, we can focus all of our attention on Excadrill, which is of course a nightmare for our poison types. Excadrill has Mold Breaker, which means it could hit Weezing through Levitate. However, I'm expecting it to try and go for Clodsire since it won't take out Weezing from this amount of health. So I make sure to protect with Clodsire as I go for a Will-O-Wisp with Weezing to completely neutralize the Excadrill. I can buy myself another free turn by switching in Arbok, intimidating the Excadrill, and also dodging the incoming high horsepower with a held air balloon. This also allows Weezing to get a bit of extra damage with Flamethrower before the end of the turn. I was expecting Lacey to try and break Arbok's air balloon here, but for some reason she just Iron Heads right into Weezing's Protect, which gives me a free turn of Earthquake with Arbok, which unfortunately doesn't quite do enough for Excadrill to go down to burn. To make sure I play this as carefully as possible, I send in another Pokemon with an air balloon so that I can't get one-shot by a high horsepower. The fact that Arbok ends up getting flinched by Iron Head really doesn't matter since Burn finishes the job at the end of the turn, which wins us the battle and grants us access to the terrarium. Here we're on a very specific mission to find a couple of poison types. The first one is in the Frozen Lake, and this is the entire reason I delayed Quillfish. Catching Hisuian Quillfish gives us another poison dark type, which we very much need. Next I head to the beach in the coastal biome to pick up a Galarian Slowpoke. I also make sure to pick up as many Galarica twigs as I can to trade them in for a Galarica Wreath. With it, our Slowpoke turns into a Psychic Poison type as it evolves into Galarian Slowking. I've always wanted one of these. With our new members added to the team, we've got to continue on with the story. To reach Area 0, we've got to take on the rest of our rivals. I decided to take on Arven first since he pretty much gets destroyed by Toxicroak. I can start the fight by immediately taking out his Greedent with a close combat, which brings out Scovillain. Toxicroak outspeeds, taking it out with a Stab Poison Jab, which brings out Garganical. There's no way for Toxicroak to take out this bulky behemoth in one hit, but we're able to survive anything it does with a held Focus Sash despite all the defense drops. That's at least what I thought would happen, but Garganical just sets up Stealth Rocks, allowing me to keep my Focus Sash intact as I take it out with another close combat. The original plan was to swap out here versus Toadscruel since I'd be at 1 HP, but because we're still at full health, I can take it into the red with a close combat as it brings me down to my Sash with an Earth Power. With a final Sucker Punch, we bring Toxicroak's kill streak up to 4, which means we've got to swap out versus Cloyster. We'd be forced to swap out even at full health here since Cloyster has multi-hit moves that always hit 5 times because of Skill Link. Annoyingly, it sets up Light Screen as I swap in Toxtricity, so my Volt Switch doesn't quite take Cloyster out despite its pitiful special defense. To stay on the safe side, I send in Arbok to lower Cloyster's attack before it hits me with a Liquidation. I can then outspeed and take out what little remains of its health, which brings out Arven's final Pokemon, Mabostiff. This thing has Psychic Fang, so I immediately swap into one of our new Pokemon, Overquill. The Dark Poison typing makes it so Mabostiff doesn't have any super effective moves, and I manage to get the Doggo Poison poisoned with a Barbarage. Poison makes Barbarage deal double damage, so my next one takes my boss diff into the red, which is enough to finish the fight at the end of the turn with poison damage. With Arven defeated, we've only got to take care of one more rival before we can finally go to Area 0. Actually, we also got to take care of Penny, but that one kinda takes care of itself. The real penultimate fight is the last rival battle versus Nemona. The most important thing we can do here is take out Lycanroc turn 1 so it doesn't have the option to set up Stealth Rock. We've got to keep our focus sashes intact and avoid taking damage as we swap around, so I make sure to give Toxicroak a Choice Scarf so that we outspeed with close combat to immediately take out Lycanroc. Once Earthworm comes out, I swap into Air Balloon Salazzle to dodge the Earthquake. This allows me to outspeed the next turn and take out the worm with a Flamethrower without taking any damage. I know Dunsparce won't go for Drill Run, and I make a bit of a mistake here by swapping back into Toxicroak as Dunsparce sets up with Coil, which raises its defense, which unfortunately means I won't be able to one-shot it with close combat. To try and get around my misplay, I swap Weezing into the Drill Run and get Dunsparce burned with Will-O-Wisp to lower its attack after the Coil. After the burn, I've got just enough wiggle room to take Dunsparce out without risking a crit. Pawmot comes out next, so I swap in my ground type to avoid the double shock. While I'm not risking a crit here, I am risking Ice Punch Freeze, which has definitely come to bite me in the past, but thankfully we don't get frozen and I can take out Pawmot with a super effective Earthquake. Nemona's 5th Pokemon is Goodra, so I swap to Toxapex, who resists every single move this thing has except for Dragon Pulse. I get Goodra poisoned with Toxic and start my stalling. It only takes a few turns and I manage to make Recover my last move to get up to full HP as Goodra goes down to poison. Nemona's last Pokemon is of course Quackable, and all of its moves are contact, so I can just go for Baneful Bunker to guarantee that it gets poisoned. We literally resist this thing's entire moveset with Toxapex, and it only does about 15% with its strongest move. This is basically an unlosable matchup, and we simply pick up the KO after a few more turns of poison. With Nemona defeated, I'd done it. I made it to the final boss of the game without losing a single one of my poison types. But that means there's still one more boss standing between us and flawless victory. The Deathless Dream is within grasp. All I've got to do now is not screw this up. I decided which 6 of my Pokemon were most suitable to bring and lead the fight versus AI Sada's Slitherwing with Galarian Slowking. We take over half from a stab lunge, so I made sure to give Slowking a held Citrus Berry to get enough HP back to survive a second one. A Psychic gets Slitherwing deep into the yellow, and I just barely survive the second lunge before Slowking picks up the first KO of the fight with another Psychic. With Slitherwing down, Sada sends out Brute Bonnet, which means I definitely can't stay in at the risk of being taken out by a priority Sucker Punch, so I swap out into Weezing to completely dodge the move. Missing Will-O-Wisp unfortunately loses me a ton of health to a full power payback, so I make sure to go for Protect to get me a little bit of HP back from leftovers. I then basically get a free turn as Sada tries to Sucker Punch while I go for another Will-O-Wisp, which actually connects. Without fear of being dealt too much damage, I'm now able to knock it out with a couple of Sludge Bombs. Sada's 3rd Pokemon is Sandy Shock, so I make sure to go for Protect before switching out just to get a little bit of healing back before I send in Victory Bell. With a held Assault Vest, we barely take anything from the incoming resisted discharge, but more importantly, we don't get instantly knocked out by Earth Power. A super effective Leaf Storm easily takes out Sandy Shocks, which brings out one of the most annoying Pokemon for us to deal with, Screamtail. To avoid eating a Stab Zen Headbutt, I send in my Dark-type Overquill. Next, I end up making a huge mistake. What I should have done is just attack this thing to try and get rid of it as soon as possible, but instead I decide to set up Toxic Spikes. My 2 layers of Toxic Spikes are going to make it much easier to deal with both Fluttermane and Roaring Moon, but more immediately, I'm losing way too much health on Overquill that I need to deal with the Screamtail. I get lucky with a critical hit Barbarage, but I would have been much happier with Poison instead of the crit. Realizing this, I put together a spontaneous game plan to try and get as much health back as possible on Overquill. Both Weezing and Overquill have leftovers, and Screamtail won't ever go for Zen Headbutt into my Dark type. Play Rough is the move that does the most damage to Overquill, and it only has 10 PP, so it doesn't take too many switches to completely stall it out of Play Rough PP. While doing so, Overquill never takes any damage from Zen Headbutt, and I keep getting more and more health back from leftovers. Eventually, Screamtail completely runs out of Play Roughs, making it safe to swap back to Overquill since its best move is now Ice Punch. With most of Overquill's HP restored, I take out Screamtail with another Barbarage, which brings out Fluttermane. The reason I needed to get back all that HP in the first place is because Overquill is my only answer to this thing. The Toxic Spikes end up actually really helping me out here since I'm able to knock out Fluttermane in one hit because of the doubled power of Barbarage. Finally, the only thing standing between my team and a flawless victory is Roaring Moon. As it swaps in, the Toxic Spikes get Roaring Moon badly poisoned, and the Booster Energy activates Photosynthesis to boost its attack. This attack boost basically means it one-shots anything on the team that can get hit by Earthquake, so I immediately swap in Weezing. Unfortunately, Weezing is all out of protects from stalling out Screamtail. I know Weezing can survive one Dragon Claw no matter what, so all I've got to do is click Sludge Bomb, but I unfortunately accidentally click A twice, going for Will-O-Wisp at the most inappropriate time possible. I at least get some damage from poison at the end of the turn, but this is not the time to throw the game. At this point, I've got to swap out Weezing, so I send in Toxapex to tank the incoming Dragon Claw. I'm able to stall out one more turn of poison with Baneful Bunker before I've got to swap out into Weezing again to dodge the incoming Earthquake with Levitate. If I would have just actually clicked Sludge Bomb, poison damage would have finished the job by now. But instead, the Deathless Dream comes down to this final turn. If Toxapex gets crit by Dragon Claw as we swap in, we still win the fight because of poison at the end of the turn, but it would instantly put an end to the Deathless Dream. And Toxapex manages to hold on. That would have been the most bittersweet ending of all time. Always play around the crit is pretty much rule number one of Nuzlockes, but sometimes the game puts you into a corner where you've gotta risk it. And what a way to end the final type lock of Pokemon Scarlet and Violet with a flawless, deathless victory. If you haven't watched the other type locks, you can find each of them on my channel, but for now, there's something I've been wanting to do the entire run that you just can't if you're looking for a deathless victory.